asking. Glad you guys came out. I'm Stephanie and I'm with FCD, and FCD's been coming to this school for a number of years, and what we do as a prevention organization is we work in schools just like yours, both stateside and all around the world. And we're very much an international organization, but we are based out of Boston. There's about 30 or 35 prevention specialists, and again, we work all over the world. We work in teams, we work singly, and when we work in schools, what we do is we come in and we have a curriculum that we use in the classroom. We have a curriculum that we use when we meet with faculty as well as for parents. And what I think the best thing about FCD is that when we come into a school and we come in and we run a program, but it's not just a program, it's also a climate. We work a climate of prevention. We have what we call a prevention wheel, and on this prevention wheel, there are several prongs on this wheel that talks about what a community looks like and who's involved in the prevention process. Now, when we come in and we work with the students, that's only one piece of the prevention. It's a large piece of the prevention process and the climate that we're instilling in a school. But also working with faculty. I've made myself available for the faculty members this week, anybody who's interested in coming and talking with me, having any questions, interested in what I'm talking about with the students, which I'm about to share with you as well. We work with parents on how to deal with certain issues around drugs. And what we really do when we talk about instilling that prevention climate is it's not just a one-time program. The goal is that this idea of prevention to continue after we leave, after FCD walks out the door. Every FCD prevention specialist is in what we call long-term healthy recovery, and what that means for me is actually this coming Saturday I'll be celebrating 10 years. And with that, thank you, and with that, I'm 31, and I stopped using when I was 21. I was still in college when I stopped using. And why does this matter, you might wonder? Well, it matters because when I work in the classroom with a group of students, I will utilize my personal anecdote to reinforce whatever teaching moment I'm trying to offer. And so I think the top things that kids want to know is how did I start, how did I stop, and what it was like after I quit. Those are pretty much the big things that kids want to know about, but really what they're interested in knowing is how does this pertain to me? And how can I identify or how can I relate to this information? I remember the prevention programming that I got when I was young, and all I remember were cops, right? There were a few instances where the police would come in and they say, here's a poster board of all of the drugs that you might encounter in the real world, and don't do them or you're gonna die. I remember being in high school and having to take an alcohol and drug program so that I could get my driver's license. It was about a 3-hour program from what I remember, and a bunch of cops yelled at us and said, don't do drugs or you're gonna go to prison, okay? And I remember one in particular, I was 6 years old, and I remember this man coming into our school, and I was in first grade, and he comes and he says, well, I was an alcoholic. And I was also homeless. And my 6-year-old mind went, oh, that's what an alcoholic looks like. Okay, I'm not homeless, so that can't be me. That was my 6-year-old. Today, what we know about addiction is that addiction can happen to anyone. We know that some people are at a greater risk for addiction than others. Sorry about this. There we go. We know that some people are at a greater level of risk for addiction based on a family history, biology. I try to remind students, if you don't know whether or not you have a family history, to go home and ask. Because this family history of alcoholism or addiction to any drug for that matter is really important in terms of some of the choices that teenagers might make. My mother and I have a long-standing joke. I've got 3 older sisters. I'm the youngest of 4. And the joke is, my mom says, well, 3 out of 4 wasn't bad. That's not bad. Because of the strong family history that we have. And with that family history, if I have a family history of diabetes or if I have a family history of heart disease, I would want to know that and I would want to tell my doctor that so that we can come up with some sort of a plan so that I can prevent that disease from happening in my life. Addiction is no different. As heart disease is a disease of the heart, addiction is a disease of the brain. And so when we talk about prevention with addiction, the best model that we have, at least for today, is delayed use. And so what FCD teaches is we're not telling kids to never drink alcohol. We're not telling them that it's evil, that it's bad, that everyone dies from it. The majority of the adult population in the United States who does drink alcohol does so in a moderate fashion. They consume alcohol in a safe and healthy way. The majority of adults do. And we know this because of what research tells us. There's only about 10% of the US population that actually is considered alcohol use disorder or addicted to alcohol. And so when we talk about preventing addiction, the best thing that we can do for our kids is helping them make healthy choices around alcohol as well as other drugs. Addiction is identified as the repetitive use of a substance despite negative consequences. So what that means is I use even though my grades are falling. I use even though I got in trouble with the police. I use even though I got grounded for my use. I use even though I got in trouble at school. I use even though I'm getting sick from it. And that list can go on and on and on. I'm sure that some of the consequences that people have experienced can be pretty unique. But I use even though, and then it goes from there. And so we're trying to prevent this. And the thing about addiction as a disease is it's actually pretty preventable. We know that if we delay our use or we just don't use at all, guess what? We can't get addicted. And so when we talk to kids in the classroom, you know, I talk about how I was 17 the first time that I used, and oftentimes I hear, do you guys think that that's kind of old or kind of young? And they're like, oh, you know, senior year of high school, that sounds pretty good. And I say to them, but that was enough. The earlier that I used, the more likely it was for me to become addicted. Whereas I've got 3 older sisters who waited till 19, 20, and 21 respectively for their first use, and they didn't get intoxicated the first time that they drank. But right around 3/4 of teenagers who do drink alcohol drink in high quantities, having 5 or more drinks in a setting. So it's unlikely, it's more unlikely that a young person is going to have that first drink, or when they drink on the weekends, that they're just going to have a drink or two, like most adults do. Because the part of their brain that tells them to stop, the part of their brain that tells them you've had enough, the forward-thinking part of their brain, it's just not fully developed yet. It's not fully developed until about age 25. Now, I wanted to go back here, sorry. Okay. So our prevention approach, reducing risks, intervening on unhealthy behaviors, and also nurturing protections. And basically what this means is that when we come into a school, our approach is to be open with students, open with faculty, open with parents, helping to foster protective factors. I saw a lot of kids today walking around with the Young Life sweatshirts, and I grew up in Georgia, and I remember Young Life as being a really positive experience, positive group for kids to be a part of, getting together, you know, once a week and being a part of some sort of a religious affiliation. That's actually what we call a protective factor, because they're focused on something that's positive and good in their lives. Sports can be a protective factor. You know, being a part of drama, being a part of some sort of a community group where maybe I'm volunteering, giving back to my community. All of those things are what we call protective factors, and we want to foster those protective factors for as long as we possibly can. What we do in the classroom, we have one of the best intensive student education programs that I personally ever seen. And coming from a background of prevention, I did statewide prevention before I started working for FCD, and we have a 4-day curriculum that we use. We're working this week with the 10th graders using the full curriculum. And so basically what that looks like is we started out talking about our community, talking about the media, talking about music, talking about advertising, talking about how alcohol companies will often sponsor, you know, behind home plate during the Braves game, talking about how in music, alcohol and other drug references have almost doubled since 2001. 1 in 5 songs has some sort of an alcohol or other drug reference. And so we talk a lot about use and culture. We talked about the minimum drinking age law and why that's in place. I typically will start by asking, do you guys think that the drinking age should be 21? And what I've noticed is that this generation doesn't really know why it's 21. Most of them know that it is, and they get that, but they don't necessarily know why it's 21. And we talked about that in the classroom. We talked about marijuana legalization. We're talking about also prescription medications. Within these seminars, what happens is we're actually pretty free-flowing, and so whatever I cover, say I get to seminar 1, but in seminar 2 we talk a lot about social norms, which I'm about to describe to you as well. And social norms may come up in seminar 1, and we'll talk about it. It's a very free-flowing, but eventually we get through all the topics that need to be covered that are a part of the intensive student education. We go from the macro down to the micro, and this is upper school. And so use in the individual, it goes from culture, community, individual, and basically what that means is we're talking about why do people use? What puts somebody at risk for use? What would make somebody to go from I don't use and I don't want to use, you know, when we work with younger kids, is don't do drugs, drugs are bad, to, well, I'm a senior in high school and I'm you know, what's the problem if I have a beer on the weekend? And how do some students go from don't do this, it's bad, to I drink on the weekends? When we talk about the progression of how our ideas around substance use changes. And just to give you an idea about what we're talking about with the middle school education, so I am only working with the 8th graders one time this week. We're going to do an assembly, and I'm basically going to talk to them about healthy choices. I'm going to talk to them a little bit about e-cigarettes and prescription drugs, especially just prescription drugs I always talk about with every group because they're so widely abused, so easily accessible, and I'm not necessarily completely concerned that your child is going to use somebody else's prescription drugs, but I'm also concerned about the fact that as kids get older, other kids may be interested in using their prescription drugs. So I'm talking about it from both angles, in terms of making healthy choices and how to make the best healthy choice for yourself. What are some of the dangers about using a prescription drug off-label or inappropriately? What are some of the dangers of sharing your prescription medication with another student or another student taking that drug that's yours? And we will also talk some about alcohol, and I'll leave the last 10 minutes or so for them to ask Q&A because ultimately I want to give them a chance to speak up and let me know what's going on with them. So when we ask kids, why do you think kids use substances? Oftentimes we hear curious, stressed out, just wanted to try it, and trying to fit in. Those are typically the big ones that we hear. And this doesn't seem like it matters, but to an extent, it actually does matter. Because if I'm willing to make a high-risk choice around a substance when I'm younger, it puts me at a greater risk for developing addiction. We talk about age of first use being one of the biggest risk factors for addiction. Of course, family history plays a role. But there are people who end up with addiction, end up with alcoholism, end up with addiction to marijuana or other substances who don't have any family history whatsoever. But that family history does elevate somebody's risk. And so we talk a lot about age of first use. Again, that delayed use model with alcohol, and I hope that they don't use other substances. We talk about the other inherent risks with other substances. You know, marijuana today, for example, the marijuana that was around in the 50s and 60s when my parents were growing up is not the same marijuana that is on the streets today, nor is it the same marijuana that's being sold legally in some of the places like Colorado and Washington, Alaska. That marijuana is anywhere between 12 to 26% THC content. Back about 40 years ago, we were talking anywhere between 4 to 6 THC content. Why is that dangerous? Well, that's dangerous because it increases tolerance as well as increases the level of addiction that somebody may experience because it's a more potent drug. And that's the bottom line. Not to say that marijuana was ever a safe substance for somebody to consume, but it's definitely more dangerous today than it was even, say, 30, 40 years ago. We also talk about cravings, tolerance, and surrounding. Craving is simply, if I like it, the biggest risk is that I might want to do it again. And so we talk about what's the risk of somebody using for the first time. If I choose to use alcohol, or I decide to smoke a cigarette for the first time, I'm either looking for two outcomes. The first outcome is if I'm going to like it or not. And the biggest risk is that if I like it, then I may want to do it again and repeat that behavior. And after a period of time, if I repeat that behavior enough, I could cross that line of developing addiction to that substance. Tolerance, a lot of people think that tolerance is a good thing. Our society, certain ways that our society supports a high tolerance, beer pong in college, drinking games. Tolerance, people are often rewarded if you have a low tolerance. People get made fun of, or people make jokes, or you just can't drink very much. But the truth of the matter is, high tolerance is actually a risk factor for addiction, because the higher the tolerance is, the more my brain and more my body has to adapt to the external substance, this toxin that's in my system, and the more danger it is for me in not only developing addiction, but other health problems as well. Cancers, heart issues, liver disease, all sorts of other issues can develop as a result of high tolerance, and it doesn't have to be the disease of addiction in the brain. It could be a number of other diseases that occur in the body. And then, of course, the other one is surroundings. This is everything from the world around us, like the media, down to whether or not my best friend smokes cigarettes or not. This could be what I've learned at home. That puts me at higher risk. This could be the group of my friends that's starting to think about using, or the group of friends that I'm spending time with who's already using. All of those surroundings may play a role. And addiction happens like this. Teenagers are going through a period of their brains changing, and what this means is their brains are going through a process of what we call synaptic pruning. Their brains are going from gray matter to white matter. And basically, what's happening here is that the brain is trying to build a blueprint. And with that blueprint, you have the brain that is trying to come together and build these really beautiful roadways. Trying to have beautiful road signs up, some really nicely pruned trees and some shrubs across the interstate, a nice guardrail across each side, really beautifully clean painted lines, and the brain is trying to develop and create this roadmap. When we insert the use of a substance, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, it doesn't matter what the substance is. When we insert the use of a substance, what happens is those roads start to change a little bit. They change course. The brain physically has changes made. And because substances tap the reward system in the brain, most specifically, what happens is the reward system, if I like this and I want to do this again, that starts to become more important to me. And so what happens when we talk about teenagers, we might see them giving up something that used to be really important to them. Oh, I quit playing softball. I just don't have time for it. It's not as fun for me anymore. But one of the key signs there might be that on the weekends, maybe once a month they're going out and they're drinking with their friends on a Friday night when on a Saturday morning they would have had that softball game. It slowly might start to compete with other things. It could be quickly, but it also could happen slowly. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this teenage brain to develop as naturally and normally as possible. And the brain is supposed to develop without the introduction of external substances changing the way that the reward system fires. We teach a lot about the social norms approach in the classroom. And with social norms, what this typically means is if I grossly over-exaggerate the use amongst my peers, then I think that I should be doing that too. I use the example, I'm seeing a lot of kids walking around with Chuck Taylors, with some Converse, right? And I said to them, why are you wearing those? Why do you like them? They're like, well, because they're comfortable. And then the guys are like, because they look good. And the girls are like, because they're cute. And they are. They're great. Look, they're great looking pair of shoes. And if everyone else is wearing Converse, is it okay for me to wear Converse too because it's a fashion statement and because they're comfortable? Yeah, absolutely. But what's the difference between wearing a pair of Chuck Taylors and smoking a cigarette because everyone else is doing it? And the difference there is one's not going to hurt me, the other one could possibly cause some harm. And so we talk about social norms in the sense that if everyone else is doing it and I think I should be doing it too, that increases my risk that I'll use that substance as well. I heard a 10th grader this week say, Well, what are you supposed to do? You know, everybody at college drinks. And so he's got this process of what we call anticipatory socialization happening. He's thinking about 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what he's going to have to do in order to be a part of the normal crowd, in order to fit in. And the fact of the matter is you know, there are a number of college students who do drink alcohol. That's absolutely true. But they're not all drinking in high numbers, and certainly they're not all drinking. And so we're trying to bring those numbers down. What I talked about with the seniors when we were talking about social norms is I asked the seniors today what percentage of college students do you think drink alcohol? You know, 80, 90, 100%. And the truth is we're talking 80% of college students drink alcohol. However, 70% of those 80% are drinking less than 4 drinks in any drinking session. What that means is that they're not drinking necessarily in super low risk, but they're not in the higher risk category of 5 or more, which is what we call binge drinking. And so taking some of those social norms down, helping them get some clues in terms of what else can you do when you go to college. If you're going to go look for the party, you're going to find the party if that's what you're looking for. But if you go to the library on a Friday night, hey, guess what? You're going to probably find kids studying. You're not going to find them boozing it up on a Friday night. You're going to find them studying in the library. There's a number of people who are actually in college because they want to learn and they want to get that education. It's not necessarily just a social hour. For most students, it's not a social hour. And so when we talk about social norms as well, we're just simply trying to prevent unhealthy behavior. What we also know that with FCD, what the program does is when we do research on schools that use FCD's programs, over a period of time, we find that their numbers of use actually go down. Part of that is this social norms approach. And the social norms approach helps students learn and understand what's really going on in the world around them. You know, 80% of sophomores, 80% of 10th graders across the United States from the Monitoring the Future survey, 80% of sophomores in high schools across the United States say that they typically never drink alcohol. And the looks on these kids' faces when you drop that number is, they just can't believe it. Because their idea is that everybody's drinking, when in fact, not everybody's drinking. So what I wanted to kind of turn this around on for you guys was to give you some more information about what you can do as a parent, what you can do to help with some of these preventive measures. Certainly, with the invention of the e-cigarette, with vaping, what basically this is if you look on this one right here, the bottom, this one in the middle, basically it's a cylindrical, looks like a pen, and on the inside of it you've got a cartridge of some sort of chemical, like either it's a chemical mixture of propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin. It's got typically some sort of flavoring like strawberry or blueberry or cotton candy, but they say they're not marketing to kids. And they'll also typically put in there some sort of a liquid nicotine. Now, what I've heard over the last couple of years, what I've heard more and more questions on about e-cigarettes is, well, what if you got the ones that are what they call zero vapes? What they're saying, well, they don't have nicotine in them, so what's the problem? Well, there's a big problem still with it. Because anytime I'm inhaling a vapor, and it's not water vapor, folks, it is a vapor that is a combination of everything that I described that goes into that cartridge. And it is not approved by the FDA. They are not regulated by the FDA. And we don't have a lot of research on them. They came out as a smoking cessation tool where you could change the cartridges and turn down the numbers. Now, I don't know about you, but back when I was trying to quit smoking, we had these things called nicotine lozenges, and we had these things called patches that did the same thing ultimately. I do know people who have successfully quit smoking using an e-cigarette, and if that's what somebody is going to use something for, if that's the best thing that we got and that works, then by all means, if that's what works, then we can use it. But that's not what they're being marketed as, and that's not what they're being sold as. They're being sold as the alternative to smoking cigarettes because public health crisis has come out with all of these warnings, and in so many places around the country, you can't smoke in a lot of restaurants anymore. You can't smoke, within certain feet of a building. You can't smoke sometimes even on certain campuses. Some business places have gone completely smoke-free. And our country, smoking rates have majorly gone down over the last 10 years or so. But the use of e-cigarettes has gone up. I just was recently reading an article where the FAA has banned the use of e-cigarettes on airplanes, completely banned it. Before it was just a rule, now it's completely banned. What parents can do. So this is the part of the conversation where when we talk about healthy role modeling. So I'm sure that there are plenty of parents of students at this school who drink alcohol on a regular basis and don't have a problem with it. Like I said, that's the majority of adults. And we're not here to demonize alcohol. But I want you just to think about something. If you have a student who typically, when they come home and you're cooking dinner and you're having a glass of wine while you're cooking dinner, and then you have another glass of wine with your dinner, and you're at your 2 drinks and you're doing your moderate consumption, but you do that 3-4 times a week. We know from a health perspective, there's nothing wrong with that for most people. But if that's what your child sees every time they come home at the end of the day, and what they're seeing is, well, that's what my mom does every day to relax, what they're learning is, that's a good way to relax for me as well. But there's a big difference between an adult having a drink and relaxing, and a kid coming home after school saying, hey mom, can you pop me a beer? I've had a long day. There's a big difference there, especially on the brain development. And they're watching everything that you do. It's important that you have conversations around alcohol. There was a study out from Penn State University about 5 years ago from Dr. Robert Teresi, and he led this team, and basically what they found was parents who are permissive around alcohol use in the home, those kids of those parents, when they left the home, they drank in higher quantities and they drank more often than kids whose parents not only talked to them about alcohol, but were not permissive about it. And so talking to your kids about alcohol and letting them know where you stand in terms of having clear and set boundaries around alcohol is really important, because the truth is that teenagers, their job is to push the boundaries, and they're going to push. And your job is to push back on those boundaries and come to a middle ground and a conclusion where there are clear rules that if I find out that you are drinking, or if I find out that you've been smoking pot, or whatever the substance is, then there are going to be consequences for that action. It's important that, that kids feel connected within not just their community, but also if they feel connected at home. Taking time out at night to have dinner with your family, taking time out with your kids and getting to know their friends. Because getting to know their friends and ultimately even knowing their parents, so you know that on a Saturday night, when your child is going to go spend the night or go hang out with so-and-so, that you know what's going on in that home. One of the big things that, that I think is really also important is finding out, hey, I just wanted to check in, and I just wanted to make sure, I know that you guys are great people, but I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be any alcohol served to my kid tonight. A conversation like that, you don't necessarily have to put it in those words, but going to the door, hey, I just wanted to say hi, here's my cell phone number if you need anything, call me later, check in, I just want to make sure everything's going okay and that little Johnny is on his best behavior tonight. Those kinds of things, but making contact. Also letting the kids know that you're watching them, or maybe you're the home where kids come to where you've always got this big bowl of candy, or you have always snacks on hand. Maybe you're the house that kids after school or on the weekends, that you're the house that they want to come to hang out at. Because you know that you're not going to be serving alcohol, and that's a safe place. That's also something that is really beneficial, because the truth is, we also talk a lot about kids having a trusted adult. Somebody, if it's not their parent, younger kids, like 6th, 7th, 8th, even 9th graders, typically will say, well, I can talk to my parents about something. And then as they start to get a little bit older, they may not want to come to mom and dad so much about certain topics. So it's important that they have somebody that they can talk to, somebody that they can relate to, whether that's an aunt or an uncle, older sibling who's also making healthy choices, we want to be careful about that, because if the older sibling is off at college and making some pretty unhealthy choices like smoking pot or drinking, you know, you want to make sure that your child, whoever that child is talking to, that their trusted adult is making healthy choices themselves. Could it be an aunt or an uncle, older cousin, somebody on somebody on faculty? But it's important that kids have some sort of a level of connection with an adult, so that if they have something that they need to come talk about, they're not bottling their feelings up inside, and they can work through those feelings. Oftentimes, the questions that we get, what do I do if my child asks me about my use? And there are a couple of answers to this, and there's not really a right or wrong answer, but just a couple of words of advice on that. If you have a partner or a spouse who your child might also ask that same question to, you want to make sure that you're on the same page, because you want to make sure that that your partner, child goes to your partner like, Dad, tell me about Mom. Tell me about what Mom was like in college. Did she drink? And Dad's like, oh yeah, Mom was a total floozy when she was in college. And then they go to Mom, and Mom's like, oh, I never did that. There can be a level of distrust there. So you just want to make sure that you're on the same page, that you've discussed with your partner or with your spouse, that you've discussed the conversation and the talking points that you want to have with your child about your own use. It's also important that when they come to you, you can disclose as much or as little as you want. But the key there is to always talk about the negative consequences. Always reiterating, yeah, you know what, that might have been fun, sure, or that sounds like it could be fun, but here are all the negative things that could have happened, or some sort of personal experience that maybe you did have with the substance and how it didn't go so well. Always reinforcing those negative outcomes. What we want to look at when we talk about some of the warning signs, typically when we look at warning signs, they could be all of the same things, I know, that teenagers will show you. I know that they can look like the same things. Being tired, getting irritable, being cranky, being secretive, telling you, I hate you several times a week, right? All of those things could be a sign of a regular teenager, right? You're ruining my life. That's my favorite. But you're looking also for the Visine in the backpack. You're looking also, for the red eyes if they're smoking pot. You're looking for anything like an e-cigarette that they're carrying around. You know, I'm not saying going into their bedrooms and snooping, right? But I had a friend of mine where we were going through his basement. His mom was like, hey, I need you to clean out your old bedroom from high school, and this is literally 15 years later. I need you to clean out your bedroom from high school because we're getting it recarpeted. So we go down to his bedroom, and on his desk, and he's a recovering addict, were hypodermic needles sitting in his ink pen jar from high school. And his mom, she literally hands the mugs over to him and says, can you go through these pens for me? Right in front of her face, right? And I say that it's kind of a shock value thing, but it's not exactly a shock value when it was right in front of her. I think part of it was that she was choosing not to look for it. And so, you know, that was a pretty obvious sign that there was some use going on. At any point, she could have walked into that bedroom and seen that and said, oh, I think my son might be doing something he's not probably supposed to be doing. That was a pretty obvious thing. But even now, like with e-cigarettes, they have these things called puffets that look like inhalers, but it's just another form of vaping. You know, so paying attention to what's going on debit cards, things that are getting ordered online, because there's so much today that gets ordered online. One of my colleagues is notorious for getting online and trying to figure out how far he can go in an ordering process when he's trying to buy an e-cigarette online. They're like, are you 18? Check the box. Yep, I checked the box, put in the credit card information, it gets sent to my house in a discreet package, and there you have it. I've got my hands on something that's supposed to be illegal for me. So just a couple of things to pay attention to with that. Paying attention to your kids' friends. You know, I think it's natural and normal for kids to rotate and move on from like one group to another group. but are they hanging out with kids who may already have a reputation for using? You might want to pay more attention. You may want to have more conversation with your kids' friends, get to know them, get to know their parents. With that, do you guys have any questions? And you guys can always check out fcd.org, that's our website. We are now a part of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. And so we have, we've got some bigger resources that we can always supply. And if you ever have any questions or if you need anything, you can also email us at schools@fcd.org. So with that, I'd love to open up for questions.
I feel that we are, I know that you're talking about chemical dependency, but I feel that it's like before we could even think about it, we're facing computer addiction. And I've actually read studies that say that it really does change the neurological structure. And in fact, they are jonesing for it. And they will do things for it. It's the reward that they're seeking for doing things. They will not do things that would otherwise have been fun in the past because they'd rather do screens. And I worry about it because I'm wondering if this is priming them for addictive behaviors. You know, has there been research on that? I mean, we talk to our kids from a very young age about the actual chemical processes in the brain and what tolerance means and threshold and how the chemicals, your body adjusts, and then they know it all, and they're very leery of chemical addiction. We've talked to them their whole lives about it, but I'm watching them, I'm like, they're addicted to screens, and I look at myself and I'm like, maybe I am too, you know? So that is something I really worry about.
Preliminary research, we don't have enough research on it yet. You know, good research on that, whether it's priming their brains for other addictive behaviors. I've read some preliminary research that has said, yes, it is priming. But at the same time, we use technology all day long now, every day. I mean, look, we've got technology up here. This is the same laptop that I'm going to probably go home and watch my favorite trashy TV show on tonight, right? I'd have to admit it. But the deal is that it's about limiting use to appropriate times. And so that means no screens in the bedroom. That means no phones in the bedroom, no TVs in the bedroom, no computers. And so that way, we have a set bedtime at 9 o'clock, it goes off, right? Because if you ever ask a group of kids, which I have done, how many of you have ever stayed on your phone, stayed up way too late texting or watching YouTube videos because you're always looking for the next video that you want to watch, or that next notification pops up on your Facebook or on your Snapchat and you're off way later than you need to be and you're losing sleep over it, right? That's a precursor, right? And so repetitive use of a substance or a behavior despite negative consequences when we talk about addiction. And so it's definitely something that people need to be concerned about, especially with kids when, you know, they're so young now getting on a computer, so young getting on an iPad. In the classrooms. And so having healthy and set limits around technology use. You know, having an age where, hey, no, my 5th or my 6th grader isn't going to have a phone. They don't need one yet. It's not appropriate. I might give them my phone when they go to the mall, but they're not necessarily going to have their own phone, right? Or making sure that, again, they only spend so many hours on their technology. You get your homework done, you've got 2 hours to get your homework done on the computer, that's it. If you don't get your homework done in those 2 hours, which is probably twice the amount of time that you're going to need to get it done, you don't get to turn your homework in tomorrow. You know, those are rules and boundaries around it.
One thing I was thinking of is, in the same sense of talking about the consequences, the negative that you get from all of these other substances, if I spend all of this time on my screen, what are the negative reinforcements that I'm going to be losing out on? How's that helping me for building relationships with my friends? How is that allowing me to be able to advance in life if we're saying this is important for our family, that kind of thing, and what we value? So it goes back to some of that same dialogue that you're using for drug and alcohol into also what we expect and how we handle screens in our lives. If that makes sense.
And I also think that, if I could add to that, not only is that precisely right, whether it's a pleasure that they're receiving, but they're also either at this age not old enough to understand what they're missing out on. So all they see is what's my immediate satisfaction, what's my immediate gratification, and they don't know that they're missing out on socializing with friends and test results and networking of people that can help them into college or through college, and not to mention just through their church or anywhere.
Sure.
It's that immediate gratification, whether it be alcohol, drugs, food, the like Pax was saying, even just time on the screen. It's crazy.
Well, anecdotally, I'll tell you that in the upper school, it'd be interesting if you walk through. They're not on their phones as much as you would think. And when we've talked about it, I teach an AP psychology class, they've talked about the fact that it's a relief when they have a reason they can't use it. Kids will talk about going to camp and turning it in and what a relief it is. And also that it's already losing, they're feeling it too. You know how you feel like if you're tied into your work email, it's too much, it's overwhelming, you just have to put it away. They're feeling that too. And so there is almost some self-limitation going on. I don't think they're realizing they're doing it, but they are. I'm curious to see, like just in the same topic as the research, this is all still new, and I'm curious to see as time stretches out and if it will continue to be as appealing, I guess. But if you see the kids standing around talking like at break, sure, some of them have got their phones out, but they're typically showing each other something, so there's still a conversation going on there. They're not all standing around separately with their faces in their phones, which is reassuring. So,
Yeah, this is tangential, and I don't know if well, anecdotally, what I am hearing about the 7th grade cohort of boys, my son does not have, my kids don't have their own phones. When they leave my house, they can have their own phone. But I'm hearing that there is a group of boys in the 7th grade who have their own phones, and as soon as the day is over, they go and coalesce for they know there are no adults, and they're looking at porn together. And it is a vehicle for all kinds of mischief in their lives. That's a tangent, but sorry, I know we're talking about chemical dependency.
No, I think it goes back to, though, what she was talking in the sense of knowing their friends. Who are you hanging with, who you're not hanging with.
They're all
and
kids
keeping
my
tabs.
son won't give the time of day.
Well, and that's a great thing. That's an awesome thing. But being aware of it, I think, is also really cool on our part in the sense of prevention-wise for our particular son or daughter. To be paying attention to this, because if we're not paying attention, then yes, we're going to be turning the blind's eye to the needles.
Other questions?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm the one with all the questions.
It's okay.
So, I've paid attention to my kids and what their tendencies are naturally. And my eldest, I honestly don't think that he's going to have problems with substance addiction. If anything, there would be other problems. But my youngest one, even at age 3, I looked at him and I was like, when you hit your teen years, how am I going to keep you off drugs? I mean, he has that personality. He has that tendency to just want the pleasurable thing no matter what, and he can refabricate reality. He's completely able to be like, this is what's real when it's not. And I'm worried. I've got 5 years maybe before I'm going to have to really be figuring out how to keep him safe. He's 9 now, so I'm here mostly because of him.
Well, I'm glad that you're here, because the deal is that the earlier we start having conversations, the better. Teaching that delayed gratification is important. And I also think that when we talk about substances, we don't put it on this shelf and it's this taboo subject that we can't talk about. It's okay to be curious. It's natural, even normal, for a child to be curious about how something's going to make them feel. But the question you have to negotiate, or the question you have to navigate is, what do I do with that curiosity when I have it? So the trusted adult plays a role. The conversations that you're having with your own child also play a role. So you talk to them now, hey, what did you learn in your drug unit at school? Hey, what's going on? I read this article about so-and-so, have you heard this? And just see where they're at. He might be a little bit young, you have to decide where your conversation starter is gonna be. But navigating, do you have any friends that have started talking about this? 9 years old is probably still pretty young for kids to be starting to think, oh, I think I'm gonna use, right? But when they start to get 10, 11, 12, 13, some kids may start to get curious. And it's not necessarily that there's a certain addictive personality. It's that we tend to see the same traits over and over again amongst people who are addicted. Those are gregariousness, that is sensation seeking, and rebelliousness. Now, you can take somebody who's an adult who doesn't have addiction and have those same personality traits and use them for something positive. And so again, that delayed gratification. So if you have a child who is a sensation seeker and likes to do things their own way, help them find a way to do that, but also staying within the boundaries of what's appropriate for a child that age.
Okay, I think we're doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually, we have civilized him towards delayed gratification.
Okay.
Worked hard on it. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Other questions? Yeah.
How prolific are we seeing spice these days?
There was a spike in 2015. There was a spike in use, and I haven't looked at the research. I'm going to have to look that up for you with Monitoring the Future to see what those numbers are. But it's still pretty low. I mean, the bottom line is that most people, the top 3 substances that people use and abuse over and over again are the top 3 most legal substances: alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. And so if you're worried about a child using spice, we got to back it up, and we got to be worried about a child using marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco typically first.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, marijuana use follows alcohol use. So we start making these stepping stones. Yeah.
We don't know what spice is.
Oh, sorry about that.
Synthetic marijuana.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's
Wow,
basic.
they go with that too?
Yes.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it's plant matter that's sprayed with some unknown chemical, and it can cause hallucinations, it can cause seizures. People get really sick on it. It's killed some people. They end up in the emergency rooms, and it's not marijuana. But if we call it synthetic marijuana, then it must sound like it's okay.
Yes.
So, just like bath salts, right? We hear about bath salts, which those are, it's like a crystalline powder chemical that is sold as packaging of bath salts, and they're sold in like head shops, like where you can go and buy certain types of tobacco, you can buy marijuana pieces, and they're labeled bath salts, and the DEA can't keep up with it. And so every time the DEA changes legislation banning a bath salt, there's a new brand out on the market, or a new chemical structure of the same product. And so the DEA now has to come up with new legislation in order to get on top of it altogether, but they're still out there. It's basically crystal meth, I mean, in a sense. It's not the same structure molecularly, but it's basically speed. But again,
Is it,
yeah.
is it a problem that we're all this clueless?
No.
Thank you, because
Okay,
I've heard words I've never heard. Bath salts, I'm like, this is.
I don't know, you're like telling me things, I'm like hearing it for the first time in my life, I'm like, what?
Oh, that you're-
I mean,
oh.
Is it a problem that, I mean,
What happens is if I walk into a classroom and a kid's like, oh, tell me about crystal meth, I'm like, why are we talking about crystal meth? Because that's something that is around, but not very many people are using. You've got a small population of people who are using these substances. We're talking somewhere around 5% of the entire population. And why are we talking about this? Because I saw it on TV. Because I saw it somewhere. And so then the media picks it up. And by the time the media picks it up, Katie Couric, when she had her own TV show, she did a segment on the Molly, you know, ecstasy, and this is the pure form of ecstasy, and people are dying from it. Well, yeah, people die from it, but it's the media picking it up and throwing some story at you to cause fear and panic around a drug, but by the time the media picks it up, it takes 3 to 4 years before the media gets hold of it. It's already been happening for a number of years. And so, again, I'm just giving you some information on some drugs that might be out there, but the bottom line is you're going to worry about alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. Education's important, and knowing what's out there. You know, there's a whole catalog of drugs. Senior today asked me how many drugs are there that somebody can take, and I was like, the numbers are endless. But the top 3 I'm worried about are alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, because those are the most abused, the most widely available, and certainly the ones that most people who get addicted are going to get addicted to at least first, if before they move on to the other substances.
They're trickier too. The kids all get that if somebody's using crystal meth, they have a problem. They don't get that they have a problem if they're drinking every weekend. And so it's an kind of an interesting point. You know, if you say to them cocaine is bad, they say yes, I see that, but not drinking beer every weekend, even though you're only 16. They don't necessarily see that being an issue. So I think the point again is coming at the things that would be the things that they would be less concerned about using that could potentially lead to this other stuff that sounds scarier, but really backing it up.
Other questions? I'm really glad that you guys came this evening. Again, check out our resources, and I am here through tomorrow. And if you guys have any questions or need anything, you can always email us, email myself. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very